So you probably clicked on this because you want to know how to make clay pins, and I'm going to teach you everything you need to know. You're going to need some stuff. I like to divide the process into 3 different steps. So we have the sculpting, we have the painting, and then we have glazing. For sculpting, all you really need are clay and your hands. I like to use Sculpey white polymer clay, but you just want to make sure you have oven baked clay. Supplemental optional things you can have are tools to help you in your sculpting process. I personally like to use an X-Acto knife to get really sharp edges. So before we paint, you need an oven to bake your clay, and then you're going to need pin backs and glue. Within this optional stage, you can also use sandpaper, which will help make your clay surface more even, which will help for our next part, which is painting. I like to use acrylic wash paint to paint my pins. I know that some people just use acrylic paint and water it down. If you don't have acrylic wash paint, that's fine. Just make sure that the paint you're using is permanent. Obviously, you will need brushes to apply your paint. After your clay is painted, it basically looks like a pin. You can technically stop here, but I know a lot of people really want that glossy, shiny, professional, plasticky look, and you get that through resin. If you're looking for other kinds of glosses, some more affordable versions are clear nail polish, or I know some people use polyurethane. For glazing, I use UV resin. I have to have a bunch of protective equipment to use the resin, so I use a respirator, a mask, I wear gloves, and I have a ventilator available. I have a little mold I use to put the clay pins on while I glaze, and I have my UV lamp. So those are all of our materials. And now let's get into the nitty-gritty of the process and make some pins.
So my technique is just to make clay balls and then flatten them, and I kind of just fiddle with it with my fingers. And here I'm making my frog, so I'm attaching an oval to a circle, and I just flatten with my fingers and push around the clay. I like to smooth things together. I think this is a technique I kind of picked up when I did ceramics, but I kind of just like to smooth the clay into each other to create a more cohesive shape, and that's just the way I like to make pins. And it's okay if you are seeing a lot of fingerprints and imperfections on the surface of your clay. You can see I have a lot of fingerprints. It's okay, you can use sandpaper to smooth it out later, and the resin will also make it look less bumpy. I use an X-Acto knife here to carve out some extra sharp edges that I can't always achieve with my fingers, or I guess it helped me save a lot of time. So when I'm satisfied with what it looks like on the front, I just flip it over and then smooth out the back. I find this helps it make it into one cohesive piece of clay, and it's less prone to breaking when it comes out of the oven. Here I'm going to quickly show you just another technique you can use. Please don't use the barrel of your X-Acto knife like I'm doing here, but it's basically like a cookie technique. You roll out the clay into a pretty even, flat shape, and then you can take a stencil to kind of stamp out your shapes. I don't have a stencil, so I'm demonstrating to you what that would kind of look like if you were to have a stencil with my X-Acto knife. Okay, so now my little clay guys are ready for the oven. I'm going to follow my package instructions, so I'm going to put them in at around 210 for 30 minutes. And also make sure that when you put them in, all your pieces are level. Because if they're kind of lifted up like this, it will bake like that, and you kind of want them to be as flat as possible. So now that my pins are out of the oven, they're all baked, they are ready for painting. But before we get to painting, we are going to apply pin backs and sand them. I do not have sandpaper in my house right now, so I'm just going to demonstrate to you kind of what I do. But make sure, please make sure that you are wearing a mask or you're doing it outside, because when you sand the polymer clay, a bunch of particles are going to come out, really tiny particles, and you don't want that getting into your lungs. Now we're going to use a strong jewelry glue to attach the pin backs to the back of our pins. I'm using this brand even though I previously talked trash about it on a previous video, because I just don't like how the glue spurts out of the bottle. But I tried using E6000 glue, which a lot of creators use. I know Cheyenne Barton uses it for her clay pins, and I just really didn't like how long it took to cure. I didn't find that it was actually that strong, and I didn't like how I had to wear a respirator and just take all these safety precautions because there's all these scary cancer warnings on the back of it. So I'm back to using this glue because I don't have to wear a respirator and the bond is instant and super strong.
We're at the painting step. I think it's my favorite part. It's where your pieces really start to come to life. I'll only be painting these three. These frogs will be our three protagonists. I use acrylic gouache paint. I know this is what a lot of artists use when they make their clay pins. The reason being you get a really nice color payoff. And the application of the paint just looks really good. You can also use acrylic paint and then just add water to it to help dilute it, because I find the more viscous it is, the easier it is to apply and the less streaks you're gonna get. I always like to keep a spray bottle, a budget-friendly tube of acrylic paint on hand, so I don't have to use up all of my acrylic gouache white paint, and this works just as fine. Your paints are gonna dry up really quickly, so this helps to just reactivate them. I hold the back so it's easier to get a grip on it, and I just go for it. I typically will apply 2 coats. And when I first started, I would just ignore the back of the pin. I'd be like, you can't see it, doesn't matter. But I think if you are planning on selling them, it does look more professional when the backs of your pins are painted. I know some people just take like a darker color and just paint the whole background a flat color, but I think I found when the front of the pin is consistent with the back, I think it looks good, so that's just what I've been doing. Okay, so I think this is done with its first coat, so I'm gonna let it dry. So yeah, it doesn't look very even. You can still see the streaks. Just add another coat. Just keep on adding coats until you're satisfied with how it looks. Also, I would make sure to wait for your pin to completely dry before you add the second coat. The reason for this is if you don't, the previous coat, which is not fully dried, the paint might come up and bring you back down to the first layer, which is counterproductive. So when you're doing really fine line detail work, this is when you want to be super careful about how much water content your brush has. So I'll kind of demonstrate on the corner here. If you have the perfect amount of water on your brush, you'll be able to create really fine lines without it running all over the place. But see, if you have too much water and you try to go in, this is a very juiced up brush. You see how it kind of runs everywhere and then your line's thicker, it's hard to control. So yeah, just play around with it, and if you don't feel comfortable, maybe practice on a piece of paper before you go in onto your finished piece. Because sometimes when you're adding details that it's a darker color, it can be harder to correct it. What is UV resin? UV curing resins are materials that are polymerized and cured in a short time by the energy radiated from ultraviolet irradiation devices. These are especially used as industrial materials for sealing, bonding, and coating. I'm using it to make glossy frogs. UV resin is toxic. It's a chemical, and you should just be really careful when using it. I think when I started out just making my pins not too long ago, I was just really excited, and I would look at other YouTubers' videos, other artists online making their own pins, but I wouldn't see people taking safety precautions, so I just didn't really know. There's not like there's like safety information on bottles like this, so I was using this resin like in my house, in my room, with no proper ventilation. I wasn't wearing gloves. And I was just getting headaches and stuff, and then I started doing my research and then realized, oh my gosh, I should have been wearing proper PPE when working with these really harmful chemicals. I want to be careful when I use really harmful, like you might not have immediate effects, but if we can protect ourselves and be more safe, like why not? This is my lamp. I would recommend getting a larger one like this. People also use the UV flashlights. I just didn't want to be out here like all day.
So now let's talk about how to actually apply the resin. I found that making a little mold and then sticking your pin on top of it is really useful to apply it well and then not get your hands and your pin all messy. I use a pretty crappy brush that I have that I'm not attached to, and this is because the resin kind of ruins your brush. And then I'll dip the brush directly inside my resin bottle because I know some people have a silicone bowl they use to pour the resin in, but I just think pouring back and forth just creates all this extra mess, and it's already so messy that I just rather stick my brush directly in there. And I found there's this happy medium quantity of resin to apply that ends up looking the best. I think if you don't apply enough, the resin won't spread properly and you'll have all these gaps and you're not going to get an even surface. But I found if you also apply too much, the resin's just going to drip everywhere and then create globs and it'll harden and then you'll just have all these weird bumps. So I would just strive to have a nice thick coat that's not too thick. An issue I run into when working with resin is having tiny little annoying bubbles appear on the surface after it's done curing. And I've tried a lot of different techniques. I've tried pouring, I've tried using a toothpick, I've tried doing a bunch of stuff to try to get rid of these bubbles. But I found that if I finish putting the resin on and I let my pin sit for a while, some bubbles rise to the top and then I use my brush to sort of pop them like I'm doing here.
Another reason for why I use these little podium pedestal things is because it helps keep the pins level. Because if I were to just place them how they were with the pin, it would be sitting on an angle, and then the resin, because it's so flowy, would flow down and then cure that way. Another thing to make sure you do is do not apply resin in front of a super bright window, because while you're applying, it will start to cure. So just be careful about your light exposure when you're working. On the packaging, it says 3 to 5 minutes, but I kind of like to just leave it in there for 30. I know that's kind of extreme, but I just like to make sure the pins aren't tacky when I take them out. So I'm gonna leave that in there for a while and then check back in with you. We're almost done. Okay, the sun has officially set, but I am done. Here are the froggies. I don't know if you can tell, but they look quite shiny and it kind of boosts up the vibrancy of the colors. But yeah, they're all done. I've put them next to some of my past creations, so it's not such a blank frame. So yeah, here's some other things that I've made. Not all of them are glazed, but I just wanted to make the frame a little less empty. But yeah, here are my little froggies. You've made it to the end of my video. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked it, or if you found some of my tips useful, I would love if you could give me a like or a comment. And if you want to see more videos, please subscribe. I post new videos every week and my channel's really growing. I recently hit 200 subscribers. And yeah, I'll see you next time.